A lot of my Sheets videos are related to using functions, but I realized I was remiss in that I never made a video for just getting started with functions. A lot of people say, oh, I use spreadsheets all the time, but it's usually just for lists of names or things like that. So I want to show you how to really access the power of Sheets, and that comes into functions. When you are entering data into a sheet, so you usually just type into it, and then that text gets outputted into whatever cell you're typing into. If you want to use a function, you have to start your text with a equal sign. What happens is it says, hey, this is my function, so now I'm going to tell you what it equals. So you can say equals 5, and then the cell equals 5. Of course, that's not very helpful. You want to actually do some cool stuff with it. You can just base it on whatever inputs you want to do. So let's say it equals 5 times 6, and it will do that simple calculation for you. And again, we want to think about what is that output based on what our input is. As someone who's been teaching algebra of various levels for the past 10 years, this is awesome for me because we're all about functions and inputs and outputs. So to sort of get you started, I want to show you some of the things that are default. You can say equals, like you saw I just did multiplying, versus some of the things that are special functions. Rather than just typing equals, if there's a particular function you want to use, you can go up into the insert down to function, and there's a few options that are useful ones right away, or you can click on more to find more functions, and I'll show you those in a little bit. So let's just go and practice with those math operators again. There are 5 math operators that you can just use in Sheets without having to use a special function. I usually encourage my kids to use these when they can because more often than not it makes your function a little bit simpler. So all 5 of these have special functions for them. However, if you're only using 2 things, it's easier just to use the particular operator. So let's say we wanted to do some adding. We could do 5 plus 8, and you can see I put the plus sign in and it will carry out that math operation. Because I wrote the equals, that's why it worked. If I just wrote 5 plus 8, that's the text that's going to show up in that cell. So I can also do subtraction, equals 5 minus 8, and it does the negatives for me. You can do multiplication, equals 5. Now the multiplication symbol is the asterisk, which you find by doing shift 8 and 7. And you can also divide, equals 6 divided by 7. It will not give you a fraction output, it will always put it in decimal form, but we have that there. And the last thing that I like to encourage people to use instead of a fancy function is to use exponents, and that's going to be using the caret. So we could do, equals 5, and then the shift 6 will get you the caret, so 5 cubed is 125. In addition to these basic math operators, keep in mind that parentheses are good too. So you can do equals 9 times 10 plus 8. And by using those parentheses, you're telling the function to use the mathematical order of operations. So let's see an example of this in a form that has inputs and outputs. So I'm going to scroll down. I had this already set up. A formula that we use a lot in geometry is the sum of the interior angle measures. And the sum of the interior angle measures is 180 times the number of sides minus 2. So I put the formula up there for those of you guys who didn't know it. Down here I have already a number of sides, and this is where I'll want my user to add in the number of sides, and then the interior angle sum is here, and that is where I would want the output to be. So I'm going to type in my formula. I'm going to say equals so that the function works. 180 times n minus 2. Now you'll notice it gave me an error. Generally in math, when you write something right next to a parentheses, it means multiplication. The sheets don't understand that, so it's important for you to make sure that you put your operator in between. It really should be 180 times that. Now, whenever I input the number of sides, it should output whatever the interior angle sum is. So we'll do a triangle. And the triangle has 3 sides. That means the interior angle sum is 180. This is handy because if you were a student or someone who cared about the interior angle measures, you could do any number you wanted. You could say that you have an octagon. Let's find the interior angle sum. Let's say that you have a decagon. There we go. Once you have a formula that's calculating, you can always reference it in another cell. So I could make another column that says each angle, and I can make a function that's based off those other 2 things. So if I have let's go back to triangle because that's a simple example. I know that the sum of the interior angles is 180, and if it's a regular polygon, they'll all be the same. And so for each angle, it would be this cell, 180, the sum, divided by the number of sides. And again, this is for regular polygons. So there we have 60. Now these functions, because they're based on each other and because I selected the particular input outputs as cells, then when I change it, they'll all change. So let's say we're going to deal with a 5-sided figure. It will change both because, again, I'm referencing those cells. To use a cell in a function, for those of you guys who didn't catch that, you just click on whatever that cell is, and then that cell will show up there. So I wanted it to equal whatever is in B58. There it is in my formula. All right, so let's look at an example of where a function might be better than just using a math operator. So I'm going to scroll down. Here I have an inventory list. So I have a bunch of different things, and I have a unit price, and then I have the number I bought. Now, the total cost for that particular thing would be the unit price times the quantity. So this is one that I might use just a math function for. So I'm going to type equals unit price cell, select that, times the quantity cell. So then I have that. In another video that I posted, I showed how you can copy down functions. And so I'm going to copy all those down so it carries out that math operator at each row level. Now, obviously, I want to know the grand total. I need to be able to turn this in for my budget report. And that means I'm going to have to add up all of these different costs. That would be pretty tedious if I have to write the plus sign multiple times. And also, what if I add something in? I want to be able to find the total cost with that as well. So in this case, it might be useful to use a special function. I'm going to start typing equals. If you know the name of the function you want, you can just start typing that function and it will pop up in the bottom. So I start with S and it starts showing me popular functions that start with S. So I want to find the sum of all of these. So I want to find the sum of a large range. So rather than doing them one by one, I can enter in a range. You'll notice that Sheets does a really good job of giving you some hints down at the bottom, and you can always click on Learn More About to open the functions in another tab. So I'm going to find the sum of all my total costs. So I'm going to select all of those cells. I'm going to close it, and then there's my sum. To format this cell, you may have to change it based on what's in it, but that's not related to the function at all. That would just be related to some of your formatting tools up at the top. So if I wanted to add a decimal space and add a dollar sign, I can do that with those formatting options. It has nothing to do with functions. Now, when you are wanting to learn more about your functions, you probably want to start researching what functions are out there. One very useful one is the count function, so I made an example for that. Here I have a big list of names and they all put in their gender. I want to know how many males I have and how many females I have. So a very useful function is the count function and the countif function. So I'm going to show you a quick example of that because that will help you get started using functions in your work or educational practices. So I'm going to start typing equals, because it's a function, count. Now if you just use the regular count function, it's going to count the number of entries in a data set. And what I want to do is I want to find out how many males I have, so I'm going to use the countif function. So the countif function, again, it gives me these lovely hints, tells me type in a range that you're going to be counting from, and type in a criterion. That means what am I going to be counting? So here I want to find out of all these genders, here we go, I want to find out how many of them are male. So I could type in male, because that's what the input is. Say enter, and it will count the number of males there. You can do the same thing for females. I'm going to use countif, and I'm going to use that same range here. And then I'm going to do, this time instead of typing in female, I'm going to click cell E135. The reason I'm clicking that is because female is already typed for me, and so again, like I showed you before, you can always reference those cells. And I want to say which one of them match that cell. So that's an easy way to use the count function or the countif function. So now you have a pretty good set of things to get you started, and it's a good idea to play around and see what kind of functions are out there. If you want to see, you can go to Insert Function and then More. That is going to open up a new tab, and it's going to give you all of the functions that you could possibly use. They do a really good job of allowing you to filter them. So if I wanted to filter by sort, and it shows me all of the things that will help me sort. You can also narrow down your choices. So if you know that you are looking for a statistical function, you can click statistical, and it will show you all the stat functions that are there. So hopefully this helps you feel a little bit more comfortable working with functions in spreadsheets. I have found that it's a lot of trial and error in the beginning, but that's how we learn. So hopefully that helps you. And again, some of the things that I did in this and more are available just by looking at my blog posts and filtering by the Sheets tab.